Hi everybody, welcome back to another edition of Web of Wyrd. It's been a little while since we got to do the last one. The energy has been very, very strong the last few weeks, and so it's a little bit of a free flow mission right now, but I'm happy to be back in conversation with my co-host Pete Jackson Main. How you doing, bro?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I say this every time because it's true. I am doing good, despite the fact that I'm sort of looking out on increasing vista of chaos out there. And it's not obvious chaos actually, but it's just a sort of subtle feeling that we're never quite going to get back to whatever was the case before, or what people used to call normal. That's gone. I'm very, very clear about that. The way people behave. We've got sunshine in the UK right now. It's been sort of threatening to come for a while. It's finally here today. We've got a nice hot day, and a little bit of cloud cover, so it's quite nice to get a little bit of a breath of fresh air at some point as well. But I'm just seeing a lot of. I'm sort of looking out there. Obviously, I deal with the public. I deal with people that I call my patients, my clients, people who come to me for help with herbal medicine. And yeah, it's quite an interesting one, because I think there's a lot of very kind of lost people around, if I can say it like that. And I feel I should be really, really badly affected by that and sort of full of dread and fear, but I'm really not. And I think it's very important, actually. There are a few things that we've talked about before, particularly around, the offered medicine and the possible side effects and downsides of that we've talked about already, which I think, the effects of which perhaps are still to come in some ways, or the full impact of which is still to come. But there's no real sign that anybody really is aware of that at the moment. It's almost still as though we're in that sort of post-pandemic holiday period, and we've had a holiday too. They gave us a holiday. The Mascot of Mayhem gave us a nice 2-day bank holiday. In fact, it turned into a big weekend, 4 days of holiday on account of the Queen having been on the throne for 70 years. And I have to say that when I hear that phrase, on the throne, I do think of people sitting on the toilet.
Yeah. I think our audience can draw their own conclusions as to how and what they think and feel about that, bro. But yes, I mean, I haven't had the pleasure of a Boris sanctioned 4-day holiday, as you guys have, or the pleasure of seeing the bunting apparently being hung up and down the country, although I seem to understand from your side that that's perhaps not what you've been witnessing, despite the fact that's what's been on the MSM.
Well, I mean, the BBC is completely full of, the whole country is celebrating. I saw absolutely no evidence of that at all. I saw some very disheveled bunting on a roundabout in Cambridge, and apart from that, nothing. When there are street parties in Cambridge, we live in a very compressed area of Cambridge, and they quite often have street parties, but there wasn't one, and they're loud, you can hear them, but there was nothing. And I spoke to my brother down in Exeter, and I spoke to people up in north of England, and across the country, really, and they're all saying the same thing. Where are all these celebrations? They're not really happening. They're happening just outside Buckingham Palace, within a very narrow camera angle, with Rod Stewart strutting around in front of the palace. Superannuated rock stars brought out for the occasion. But really, I mean, everybody was shopping, as far as I could see.
Sorry, was that shopping or shocking?
Shopping. No, shopping, as they usually do on bank holidays.
Yeah, just the people at Buckingham Palace who are the shocking ones, right?
The shocking ones, yeah. No, they're all down home base, as far as I can see.
Wow, what a choice, man, for a weekend, a 4-day holiday, celebrating the Queen on the toilet or home base. Well, all I can say is I'm glad I'm living in Mexico, bro. If those are the options available for you guys on the weekend back in Britain.
Well, I mean, come on, it was what's not to like, really. I mean, the weather was quite good. There was sitting in the garden. There was not having to work. Yeah, it's fine.
But you know, all joking aside, you know, there are some serious points in there, right, which I think we're going to unpick a little bit. And yeah, our favourite Mascot of Mayhem has been up to his usual tricks again this week. He's managed to seemingly dodge another bullet, right? With the whole party gate. It doesn't matter how criminal or how obviously, what's the word? Deceitful he is in the language he uses or the actions he takes, he just seems to keep on rolling. And one has to wonder, what is the deeper story behind all of this, particularly when he turns up at the narrow camera angle scenes outside the palace and then gets booed, I'm assuming by people who are not in that narrow camera angle, probably outside of it somehow. So clearly Boris is a popular chap riding the wave of that popularity with his colleagues in Parliament, right?
Yeah, I mean, one would think so, but it's very strange. Again, there's no commentary on it. You know, there are sort of persons sort of getting very hot under the collar, not just about Boris, but about the Tories in general, because the other thing that, of course, is big in the news at the moment is shipping certain types of refugees off to Rwanda, which I'm very pleased to say is going to be challenged in the High Court, hopefully in time to stop this flight on Tuesday. And again, you know, the height of absolute blatant racism, when you consider that the kind of people that they're shipping off there are also people who fought alongside our boys in Afghanistan, whose cities in Syria were bombed to hell by our forces, and they're all being forced to go to Rwanda, whilst of course everybody's opening their arms wide to accept Ukrainians into their own homes here. I mean, the stench of hypocrisy is huge. But again, I don't really see this stuff. I haven't met a Ukrainian yet, a Ukrainian refugee. I know Ukrainians who live in the UK. So the whole thing is kind of, you know, but Tory bashing, I think is still alive and well, and I'm happy to say that, really.
Good.
I think, yeah, exactly.
Favorite pastime for some of us, right?
Yeah, and they are, you know, they are really a bunch of criminals when you look at it, and the way the privilege that they command, the money that's in the cabinet. I think somebody once estimated that there was something like 17 or 18 billionaires in that I think was David Cameron's cabinet a long time ago. But you know, they are they are execrable people, because they just they kind of command so much power, and they could do so much good, but they just don't do it, and they do horrendous things. So but then, of course, as we were saying earlier, bro, you know, Keir Starmer, what's the alternative? And as you said, I think, you know, Boris is probably still there because the alternative is unthinkable.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, some interesting points there. And, you know, I have to say, I'm going to hold up this, and never thought I'd say this, that actually, despite many things, and Tory bashing being something of a national pastime in the past, certainly for a lot of my family, the only people who stood up to anything in this process and actually questioned anything was a handful of Tory backbenchers, about 20 to 30 MPs. So the only ones that I was able to observe during the whole of this process of the last 2 years who actually seem to have any integrity left and were actually questioning things. So I just want to put that on the record too, which I find is interesting. In fact, many friends have been moved to comment about similar things, whether it's in the US with the Democrats and the Republicans, or even in Britain, is that those parties that perhaps many of us more free-thinking, liberal-minded people might have supported in the past are the ones who've actually generally been the biggest subversive influence. So I think that's interesting. And also, you know, there was a significant rebellion within our Mascot of Mayhem's own party, but at the end of the day, they still weren't able to do the right thing and remove somebody who has been basically charged as a criminal for breaking rules that he enforced on the rest of the country. And I do wonder, at what point is this kind of performance by Boris actually going to trigger the masses in Britain into going, hold on a second, you are a pathological liar who now seemingly is putting it back onto the people. I love the way he's done this. It's just, I just want to get on with being the Prime Minister. And really, I can't do that because you people out there are forcing me to be investigated for the criminal activities I've been engaging in. And that's why I can't do my job properly. So I find the whole narrative to be somewhat amusing, but also incredibly absurd. And I think that's the point. And I think that this is a big piece that's going to come up over the next couple of months. Is like, are you watching what's going on? Are you believing what's going on? Or are you able to see beyond the facade and go, why is this coming up? Why are we being pointed towards the corruption in government? Why are we being asked to question whether, 250, 300 MPs, whatever it was that voted to keep him in power, are doing that when clearly he needs to go? And I think the answer is because people have their own vested interests, and rather than the interests of the people.
I agree. At that level in Parliament, obviously, you know, they're all scared for their jobs. I was just thinking as you were talking then, though, that the Boris phenomenon is a very interesting one, because you say, you know, well, why shouldn't I just be allowed to be prime minister? Because actually, he could add to that. You knew I was a criminal.
Yes.
You knew I was a liar when you voted for me. So why aren't you now letting me go ahead and do what you wanted me to do? So he's kind of got a point. There was no shortage of data on Boris. There was no shortage of people saying, this guy's a shyster, do not vote for him. And yet everybody did. Even people up in the north of England who voted Labour all their lives voted for Boris, because you know, because they were so, I suppose, afraid of the alternative, the other guy that we talked about a little bit earlier on, and also because of the whole Brexit phenomenon. You know, I think there are sizable numbers of people in the country who really still believe that he's delivered us from a huge evil in getting us out of Europe. So it's a very, very muddled, muddy kind of terrain, this one, but out there on the street, so to speak, if I can just put it like that, I don't really get the impression anybody cares very much. You know, we also we're inured to it. You know, I mean, I don't watch the news unless I absolutely have to. I do sometimes just to keep up with the inversions, and I just have to remember to invert everything back to front again, and then it'll all be true, sort of thing. But when I do, I'm like, you know, it's just coming at us again. It's just data being blasted at us. And I think to some extent, people have sort of gone into a zombie mode with it all. Then they're not really paying attention. They've got better things to do, maybe. I don't know.
Right. And I think this is a really important point. I'm glad you brought that up, because I am sensing, and I have the benefit of being on a different continent right now and being able to energetically and also through interactions with people in Europe feel the difference between this land and the land that you're on. And what I'm sensing is that there is a complete, how to say, disconnection from what is going on, and of course, you know, the media, particularly the MSM, is full of illusion. But as long as you know that, like me and you do all the time, we look at it and we kind of take it on board. Okay, this is the current narrative. Look at a spread of different you know, resources to get different views and different perspectives, and then try to draw some conclusions without ever getting pulled into what, you know, whether it's true or not. And I think that this is a big piece that's going to come up. You know, we've had a lot of Neptunian energy in Pisces recently, which is also about sort of film and performance and illusion, and of course, you know, the illusion box, the goggle box, or whatever, is one of the major mechanisms through which a lot of information can be disseminated. And this is where we have to really have a process of discernment, but also perhaps the ability to look beyond the presented pictures. And we're going to be talking about a plant later in the show, one of my all-time favorites, Lady Wormwood, who's really good at doing that. But yeah, I think it's important that that we don't become too disconnected from what is really going on, because the truth and the disclosures that many people have been clamoring for a long time are now really going on everywhere. Seeing it, and again, I have the benefit of distance from Europe at the moment, so I have different access to different channels. But if you know where to look, and even in the American mainstream media, there's a lot of interesting talk and discussion now about the Biden family, good old Uncle Joe, and his even nicer son Hunter, and what he's been up to out in the Ukraine, and what was really on his laptop, are now really being disclosed in the mainstream media. So this is really going on, and it's interesting to see the difference of disclosures in the US as opposed to Europe right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the things that's happening in the UK, particularly. We're just not being fed anything meaningful from on this score at all. There's a lot of stuff that you're talking about that I'm totally ignorant about, and I'm kind of wanting to educate myself. But as we said last time, you know, there's a wall that they've set up around the media that only allows certain things in. I can't get RT. I mean, I know that there are ways of doing it. Don't get me wrong. I have to exert myself a little bit and maybe research some additional ways through. But you know, it's not easy, and I'm a busy man. So for a lot of people in the UK, they have no other source of information, and that I think is deeply worrying.
Right. You know, and I think the point is not to get pulled into the emotional tags that these stories are programmed with, because they're very clever, and we've been subjected to them for a long time. But to be able to see them and take, again, that step back, take the eagle's perspective, the non-dualistic perspective, and see the story for all that it is. And then to make your own decisions based on that, but not to make decisions based on the narrative as it's being presented. And I think that that's a large part of the transition that we're all going through. And I think that it's going to be very present in our world over the next 6 months. The astrology really is the key to understanding a lot of what is going on. And when you understand the astrology at its higher note and at its lower note, it's very clear to see the two trackways that are being presented to humanity. There isn't much of a middle road from what I can see. There's the new earth, or there's an adherence to the old paradigm. And the old paradigm is very much in collapse. And good old Mascot of Mayhem is desperately in his own way trying to point towards that. I think the Jubilee also was an indication of, like, do we really want to support this monstrosity anymore? This as RT pointed out, how come you're spending so much money on this Jubilee performance when your people are basically facing, rising oil prices and food shortages? Is this something you still want to support as a country? So I think that a lot of these things, we're being asked to look at it and say, what do I feel about this actually?
Yeah, and when I said, that we're not being fed information that perhaps we need, I again, it's like I'm assuming we have a highly intelligent listener audience out there who is capable of taking our advice, which, as you said very rightly, is to watch it, but draw your own conclusions and analyze it, assess it according to your own intelligence. A lot of people are sadly unable to do that, and that, I think, is where, but for me, I'm looking at a situation where that's concerned, where there is no real, as far as I can see, even the shortages and the high prices and the proliferation of food banks across the country are not galvanizing people into revolution at all, which I maybe this is a kind of an intended side effect of something that has been offered to us recently. I don't know, but people are just being dumped on from a great height, and they're not protesting.
Right. Yeah, the path to sovereignty does require us to be able to step up and take responsibility and be able to distinguish what is going on in the world around us, so that we can make more informed choices. And for those of the world population and our listeners who want to move into a new earth, and I assume hope that that's many of our listeners, that this is something that's very obvious to me that needs to happen. We need to be able to discern, not necessarily to participate, because I think there's many things being projected through the MSM that is not helpful. But I think now I'm sensing a real shift, and what we're being presented is the opportunity to look at what has been going on, what really was going on in the Ukraine, what really is going on with the offered medication, what is going on with the so-called knock-on effects from that, and also, in the US now, this is the other piece I want to bring in, there's a big impending decision on the Roe versus Wade case, which has prompted the National Guard to be put on alert. Hence, there's the significance of this court ruling. So again, we're being asked to look at what does Roe versus Wade really mean, and of course it's about the right to have abortions, and this can be a very emotive issue for either side of the fence. And I think whatever we might think on that particular issue, it's also interesting to see how this potentially volatile decision could trigger a reaction in certain parts of the population in the US. So again, we're being asked to look at something that's going on. What do we think about it? Are we going to react? If so, how? Are we going to react with vitriol and anger, or are we going to go, let me just sit with this and see how do I really feel about it? And particularly, and at the risk of entering into a much bigger debate, I think when we were talking about this before we jumped on the show, I think there's an interesting aspect here to do with much more esoteric ideas to do with soul contracts, and possibly what happens sometimes with miscarriages or beings that don't seem to quite manifest into the material world. So I think that's an interesting point too.
Absolutely, and again, this sort of, I mean, from you and me, this gets very personal, so it's probably maybe not the right time to talk about it on a public forum. But my understanding certainly is that not every entity that comes, earthwards, so to speak, is intends to stay. and that in a dimension beyond the 3D, which of course includes the timeline, and the existence of time is all very much bound up with that. You know, if you step out of time and out of that continuum, you're in a world where decisions can be made in a number of different directions. The probabilities are endless, and beings, entities can choose to come into a womb for a short period of time and then to depart. And the manner of their departure is sometimes, again, part of the contract. That's my personal feeling. I'm probably going to get up a lot of people's noses with that, but you know, I've been involved in situations like that, and you either feel like you know, you feel horrible and you feel like a criminal, or you feel, you know, devastated in some way, or you accept the greater meaning of these things at some level. You know, we've taken advice on a few occasions with this kind of thing, and it's always been very comforting. Actually, on the other side, it's always okay, and the entities don't, you know, they're not after your blood for having aborted them or whatever. You know, there's an understanding that these things have to happen. And of course, the Roe versus Wade, I mean, I was, as many people were, deeply shocked when the possibility that that would be overturned was broadcast. But again, it's one of those things that came into our awareness in the UK news, and it just seems to have gone away. Again, I don't hear many people talking about it, which is extraordinary. But then, you know, there is a sense also of, well, we're okay here. But I know in America it's a very, very big deal. I'm be very interested to hear what you know about the response to that, because I don't think this is being broadcast here at all, unless I've just been completely, you know, off the circuit.
Well, I mean, yeah, what I do understand is, well, again, this is where we have to have a sort of non-dual perspective on, is this really a corrupt Supreme Court that has been primed to trigger something in the American population? Is that true, or are we being shown something by a group of actors, we could say, perhaps, who want to bring something into our awareness? What do we feel about this? Because, you know, as you've just said, and this is the more kind of higher mind perspective that I would look to feel into with this, which is exactly what you said, that we can't always know the full karma of beings who are perhaps going to manifest temporarily into the 3D world. Maybe they just have to come temporarily and have some experience that then allows them to jump onto the next experience here in samsara. And I think that this is an important place to try and get to understand many, many things, because, you know, whether we understand the karmic process or not, and within Buddhism, we are told that really karma is a hidden phenomenon that only somebody who's truly enlightened with Buddha nature can see in its entirety, because it's that complicated. So that's also worth bearing in mind. But at that level, when we think like that, we don't always know what are the soul contracts, because we're not in touch enough with ourselves currently at that higher mind perspective where the soul contracts are made. And I think that this is an important point, not just for the Roe versus Wade and what we feel about abortion or not, but many, many aspects that are going on in our world, particularly to do with the acceptance of certain medications or whatever. You know, I had to go through quite a difficult process of coming to acceptance about all of that, and understanding that there are many soul contracts that people have signed up to that I'm certainly not privy to. The only ones I can really focus on are the ones that perhaps I have agreements with other beings, and starting to understand it from that perspective. And I think that's a much more liberating view anyway for me, and certainly you said it yourself, it can give some comfort, but it's also, you know, helping us to shift to a different kind of thinking about many things. And maybe that's the deeper reason for Roe versus Wade. But at the same time, we also have this big Pluto retro over the US natal Pluto coming up in July. So there is a lot of triggering about to happen. Some of it is necessary perhaps to engender a response, perhaps unlike the one that hasn't happened in Britain.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, again, a few points to pick up there. The idea that so-called negative events, or events that are perceived to be negative, may be part, to put it somewhat, you know, kind of sentimentally in some ways, I guess, maybe part of a greater plan. You know, I don't want to get sort of evangelistic about this, but I do feel that reality is way, way beyond what we can currently perceive at a certain level. And that actors, as you referred to, people like Boris Johnson and Joe Biden and people like that, who are sort of set up to, you know, with this impossible task, really. I mean, who really I ask the question a lot of the time, actually, who really is in charge of this place? Because it can't be these people. They haven't got a clue. You know, if they were working for me, they'd have been sacked long ago. So, you know, what are they doing there? And I think it is partly that, you know, they've come here to show us something. Absolutely. And I think if you, whether that's true, putting that in inverted commas, whether that's true objectively or not, is neither here nor there. Because if you decide that that's the way you want to look at it, then it becomes true and you start to open your mind immediately. It gives the possibility of a different narrative emerging. And I think it's very important, because one of the things we have to do at the moment is to construct our own narrative about the way we want the world to be, not just accept what we're being handed.
Boom, bro. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a super, super important point. And it's something actually that I talk about on the recent interview I've just done with Pam Gregory, which is going to be coming out in the next couple of days. And that is about truth and what is your narrative. And again, this is where once we get that eagle's perch perspective, we can start to take this more non-dualistic observational, you know, sort of viewing of what's going on and start to see that perhaps there is no good and bad, and that everything is part of a process designed to wake us up to much more higher mind thinkings about things, so that we don't get pulled and manipulated so easily at the 4D emotional level, which is really where a lot of the programming is coming from. You know, the sort of 5D and above perspectives are not so bound into emotional triggers. And yes, I couldn't agree more that, you know, this is the time for us to now be discerning about, what is the narrative being presented? Do I subscribe to that? Is that really a future I want for myself? Or am I going to go, let me work now with a different kind of consciousness, a different aspect of myself, and start constructing my new earth? How does it look to me? And this is something I've been sharing with many clients right now, is, you know, really start to think about, what do you want for yourself? Don't put the blockages there. Don't listen to the mainstream media. Ask yourself, where do I want to be? Who do I want to be with? And what is it that I love? And use that as your new building blocks for construction for the new earth.
Yeah, and actually that's where healing begins too.
Yes.
You know, I come to this time and time again, you know, in my work, the delivery of plant medicines is just a part of what one's doing, and that's a very powerful part as well. But I'm also in dialogue with people who are in crisis, and that crisis is very often a crisis of faith, actually, in the sense that they no longer know what they're here for, or what they want, or how to get what they want. And there are sort of deep wounds and injuries that they may be dealing with as well. But the healing begins with the ability to imagine that it could be different, to imagine your way through that situation and arrive at something that is, I mean, this is really meaningful to me at the moment, because I'm constantly on a healing journey in myself. I have things in myself that need to be healed, and I come again and again, I'm brought back to the source of the discomfort, the disharmony, the dis-ease, is that I'm not being fully aligned with my true desires and what my heart really, really wants, what makes my heart sing. I think we've talked about this before as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're going to be talking about plants that are really good for alignment in just a few moments with the Artemisia clan. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, it's worth remembering that the world around us is a reflection of the world inside of us. And, you know, a little piece that's perhaps worth sharing, which I think is an indicator about many things, is at the beginning of the process of 2020, we were told in Britain that wearing masks was mandatory unless you're exempt. And so then that prompted a few of us to look into how do you get to be exempt? And actually it was really straightforward. Go onto the government website. They handily had given us a whole bunch of printable PDFs, and you got to decide whether you were exempt. Oh, great. So that's what I did. And as a consequence, and this is, I think, the really interesting thing, a whole bunch of us in our area in Mid Wales did the same thing. So we all had these exemption badges because we were not buying into the narrative. And as a consequence, I never actually got asked by anybody why I wasn't wearing a mask, not in the supermarkets, not anywhere. And so it made me think a lot about, like, is this because it's in my field? It's like, don't even bother asking me because I have my exemption badge. So people didn't bother asking me. However, the people who didn't have that, who were going into the supermarkets without the mask but feeling super self-conscious, they were getting all of the ire and the irk from those people that were. So I was like, kind of found that super interesting, that it's like my world, I never copped any flack from anybody, and yet other people did, and I was just like, what's the difference here? And I think really it was about the stance and the energy that I carried in my field. And in fact, all of my friends who in the region who did a similar attack, they also didn't cop anything from anybody. So I just think that's a little interesting story to share, and it also shows how absurd the whole process was at the beginning anyway, which
absolutely,
which kind of gave many of us the idea, hold on a second, this is some sort of in joke here. And actually all the way through, there were always get out clauses that were being offered to us. You just had to be listening and watching carefully enough to get them.
Yeah, I had a similar experience walking around a well-known supermarket and without a face covering. And a guy sort of surreptitiously approached me and said, because I never wore any of those lanyard badges things, because I actually thought, what I will do if people accost me is I will say, you are now in breach of the Equal Opportunities Act of 2010 and quote chapter and verse, because the other thing that was on the government website that a lot of people missed was you're not allowed to challenge people for not wearing a mask. It's illegal. So it kind of sidled up to me and says, how do you get away with not wearing a mask? And I said, well, you just don't have to. You don't have to. What do you mean you don't have to? You don't have to. Look on the government website. It says you don't have to wear a mask.
Right.
And he was so grateful. He took his mask off and beamed, and it was great. I hope there aren't too many mask wearing people listening in. Probably.
Well, I just think,
disappointed with us, Davyd.
Well, you know what I mean, I just listened to what the government advice was and decided to utilize their advice, and very gratefully.
Yes, absolutely.
So again, choices. What does your reality look like according to what information do you let in, and how discerning are you? And I just use that as an example because I found it very interesting that it was mandatory, except if you're exempt, and you got to decide whether you're exempt. And as you said, nobody could challenge you on it. So it was foolproof. It was a foolproof mechanism. Really? Do not have to endure those horrible face coverings. So anyway, I think that's an interesting point. But the healing begins in that place of self-love, right? And creating a reality around you that feels good and feels aligned. And I just want to bring in another little piece here, because it's been very much in my awareness this week here in Mexico, which has a little bit of a culture of machismo, shall we say. But I happened to spend some time in one of the other major cities this particular week, not Mexico City, but another one close to me here, Guadalajara, which I was sort of somewhat interested to see the level of wokeness and inversion of the masculine that I was witnessing. It was I found it quite challenging actually to see how diminished the masculine was in the city from a number of perspectives. And I feel that this is something that is going to need to be addressed in our society, because it's been difficult to be a white male in the world over the last 5 years, because of many ideas that have been projected at us that have kind of made it difficult for us to speak up. And I understand a lot of the reasons behind that, but it's also diminished the masculine to the extent where there isn't balance now with the feminine. And so I just want to bring this into the mix, because we're going to be talking about plants that can help realign us. But I just wondered if you have an opinion about any of that, Brian.
Well, I'm kind of in an old warrior where that's concerned, because I think I've said this on a previous Web of Wyrd, actually, that I was very much involved in the big 70s, late 60s and 70s upsurge of the women's movement. It was happening when I was at the university, and in the years following university, I had a lot of contact with the women's movement, and there was a men's movement as well. But as I said to you earlier, I think the men's movement was sort of doomed from the outset in a way, because as you said, there are only certain directions you can go in, particularly if you are white and male. There's an assumption of privilege there, and I don't want to be I'm not moaning about it. I'm very happy to be who I am, but that's the thing, it's all a mask anyway, and I think it misses the point to some extent to sort of even talk in those terms. I know about the political realities, I'm well schooled in all of that, but we all wear a mask. We come here in a certain type of body for certain type of experiences, knowing that those experiences are likely to happen, and we deal with that. And yes, if we are conscious people, we resist any kind of discrimination, any kind of attempt to put someone down for being other than they are. Fashionable almost to be injured in a way, And that's what I don't like about movements like that, and what I don't like about the sort of sexual inequality. I'm not saying that the inequalities are not real. I'm saying that we can change the narrative, but we have to do it individually, don't we? For ourselves.
Yeah, and thank you for all you just said there, bro. And I just want to re-emphasize that on this show, we're always trying to break down the dualistic narratives that are being presented to us by taking a more non-dualistic view, which is, potentially is always going to lead us into areas that perhaps might get us into trouble. But we need to be brave and talk about some of these things because they're in our world, and we've been heavily programmed to be victims. And that's not a program that serves any of us. But the more that we're programmed, and the likes of good old Mr. Soros has really set that up nicely with the global media through the Black Lives Matter and the Me Too campaign, all of which, of course, is completely justifiable because that stuff has gone on. But somehow I feel like some of us further down the food chain have carried the can for those privileged white males who have done lots of bad things in the world. But it's worth pointing out that not every white male is made in the image of Joe Biden or David Cameron or any of these other people, and or Boris Johnson, and no disrespect to those people, they're also playing their own roles in all of this. And that's like, again, the sort of the non-dual approach I think we need to have. And I made, well, as it turned out, it seemed like a mistake at some point in the past of sharing a post where I put all lives matter, which I thought was a pretty heart-centered sort of meme to put out. And I got absolutely slammed for it on social media because I wasn't allowed to say that, because that was diminishing all of those people who've suffered. And I'm like, well, hold on a second, I've suffered too. And just because I have to have a certain color skin does not mean that I'm impervious to suffering. So then you get into the debate, well, whose suffering is worse than whose? And I'm just like, that's, to me, a whole pointless debate, because in person, your suffering is your suffering. No matter what color, creed, gender you are, it's like if you're suffering deep trauma, you're suffering deep trauma. It's not something that then has to be compared to somebody else to see whether you're suffering or they're suffering more than you are. I mean, I don't know. Maybe this seems like a strange thought, but I kind of think that all lives matter, and I'm happy to go on record for that, because all lives do matter. And yes, within all of that, there are a lot of traumas, including the wounding of the masculine, including racism. And, we talked about this too, the refugees for Rwanda. Thankfully, that one's being brought into the awareness. And maybe, again, this was another story to show us the inequality of like this situation. How come some refugees get shipped off to a country that has a terrible track record on human rights, and some get shipped in from a country that has a track record on terrible human rights? So it's again is that narrative being fed. And what's also interesting is that some of those refugees being shipped in from Eastern Europe are of the same skin color and denomination as people being shipped to Rwanda. So it is interesting to wonder how people from the subcontinent in North Africa have suddenly got Ukrainian citizenship status, and they can come to the UK, but others apparently from the Middle East perhaps are not able to. So, I think all of this, really, the point I'm trying to get to is that we are being shown the inequalities very, very clearly if we want to look. And it's difficult to look, I get that. There's so many things in our world that are dark and depraved, and they've been dark and depraved for a long time, and we've allowed them to perpetuate by not wanting to look at them. But we are in a Taurus North Node, Scorpio South Node period, and that is really designed to bring the toxicity and the poison and the depravity of the past into the spotlight so that we can progress to a new Earth with the North Node in Taurus, which is much more about Mother Earth and grassroots up. So thank you for all that you shared, but I think it's important, and I hope that our audience out there understands what we're trying to say rather than jumping onto the emotive tip, because of course everybody has suffered so much in their own different ways, and that has been going on for a long time. So I think that that's also something that perhaps is worth saying, that perhaps we can come to a place of equality and understanding that we've all suffered a lot.
Yeah, and again, this is a much bigger story than one incarnation. And yes, again, we could sort of expand it into that discussion as well. But I'm pretty certain we've all been black, white, male, right? Female, whatever in our many journeys through the universe. So it really does make an absolute nonsense that anybody is discriminated against in any way, shape, or form. And again, it's just a story and a mask and a soul contract. Yeah, the whole thing. I was just gonna say, I've been itching to say this actually before we too far away from the Queen. She seems rather a long way ago now. I did pick up another thing that really, really intrigued me and made me laugh, even though it's not very funny from seen from a certain perspective. But this was John Lydon, i.e. Johnny Rotten, who, of course, wrote the track "God Save the Queen," the fascist regime, etc. And sort of interesting things emerged in an interview that he did recently, where he actually said this was not an anti-human song, it was an anti-royalist song. I actually do admire the Queen because she's lasted such a long time and made such a success of her life. And I thought two things about that. Hang on a minute. What do you mean an anti-royalist song? And now you're bringing up the royalty for lasting a long time. That's what we're there to do. And secondly, this whole thing, it's not an anti-human song, where you plainly state in your lyrics, she ain't no human being. And I just thought, of all the sort of turnarounds, I mean, I know that John Lydon has been an out-and-out Tory for a long time now, basically we all know that. But that was just, he gave us one of the most iconic statements of don't worship a sovereign, reclaim your own sovereignty. The whole punk movement, he was the icon of the punk movement, and he comes out, he turns around 50 years later and says something like that. Amazing, just amazing.
I mean, yeah, so many multi-layers to all of that. But of course, he was also a part of the great left field track, Open Up, with the very, very powerful incantation that is designed to bring Hollywood down. And I've been at concerts where that incantation was being sung by thousands of people, and it's powerful, man.
Yeah.
Not sure what to make of the other bits and pieces around good old John, but that is interesting. And yes, we did kind of drift away from the Queen, and perhaps that's what we should be doing as a nation, just to put that thought out there too. So we're talking about alignment. We're going to head into our final piece of the show for today. We're going to be talking about the Artemisias, and you've been fortunate enough to see our dearly beloved Witch Queen friend, Lady Mugwort, adorning the motorways of southern England, I believe, bro.
I have. It's a perennial pleasure. Actually, going down my journey into work takes me down the M11, and particularly down the southern end of the M11. The Mugwort is just shooting up right now in the central reservation and on the verges, but I love to see it in the central reservation because it's such a massive finger to the whole environment, really. And it's just amazing stuff. We have it in the garden, we have Mugwort in the college garden as well in London, and but when I see it wild, it is something special, really, really special. And I'm kind of quite grateful for the inevitable logjam of traffic that takes place at that particular stretch of the M11, because it means I can sit in my car, wind the window down, and get a real good eyeful of the Mugwort. And the Mugwort, of course, is something that I personally have had a lot of close contact with, and I studied her particularly. And she's been with me for a long, long time now. I remember sitting with a friend of mine in Cork in Southern Ireland. Shout out to Chris, actually. I don't know whether he might get to hear this, but Chris is kind of real kind of herbal alchemist. I mean, he knows about brewing and distilling and that sort of stuff, and he just brewed up some Mugwort beer, and I remember sitting on the escarpment overlooking Cork City with him as he brought a bottle of this stuff out. We shared it on a seat, watching the sun go down. It was one of the most psychedelic experiences I've ever had. A real trip of the highest order, and I've never forgotten that. And I gave Chris a shout out in the piece that I wrote about it too. I wrote a paper about Mugwort. The other thing I really like about it, I'm not talking much about the medicinal benefits right now. The other thing I found out about it, it has a really interesting Gaelic name. They call it Mongach Meshge. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that completely wrong, but it means wild, unkempt, and long-haired. And they really sort of revered that quality about Mugwort. Mugwort has across the globe has an interesting reputation because, of course, revered as a sacred plant and a magical plant all over the world, not just amongst the sort of Indian, the American Indian populations, but also in the Far East as well. It was also a magical plant. I understand the origins of moxibustion, which uses mugwort in acupuncture, were in fact magical to start with and not medical. I mean, the system of TCM came along later and sort of imported that practice, but at the time it was like brushing or smudging and incense and that kind of thing. But the other thing about it is, of course, the other side of mugwort is that it's also reviled in America as a noxious weed, which kind of disrupts agriculture, and in Italy and other places in Europe for being a source of allergic pollen, an allergen basically. So it has this ability to get up people's noses, literally, which I rather like.
Well, for anyone who knows me well, the Artemisias are my kin and my clan, and I have spent a long time working with the various Artemisia branches of the family. It's just worth mentioning there are three major branches. There are what are called the mugworts, there are the wormwoods, and the sagebrushes. And people often get the sagebrushes mixed up with sage, which of course is a salvia, also an amazing plant, and perhaps a guest on a future show. But just a couple of little things to bounce back, because I can see us talking a little while about the Artemisias, and perhaps we'll do an extended piece at some point more about this, because I think they're a big part of what is going to be needed over the next couple of years for a bunch of reasons. But it's interesting, I always think, to see the mugwort growing down the centre of the reservations or the motorways in the south of Britain, because mugwort has a reputation for being a protected plant for travellers, and she would often be seen lining the roads in the past to protect travellers. And Roman soldiers would also put mugwort into their sandals, and I kind of wondered about that for a while until I came to understand the whole process of moxa much more, and I understood that the constant rubbing of the feet in the sandals would release the volatile oils in the mugwort, which would then be soaked in topically through the feet, which would actually then give the soldiers more energy, because the heat from mugwort, which is why it's used for moxa, then surges through the meridian lines and can actually give energy to somebody too. So the whole thing about moxa is super interesting. That's another type of Far Eastern mugwort, but same family, very, very similar. I also used to grow coastal mugwort, Artemisia suxdorfi, which is from the west coast of America, and also Artemisia douglasiana, which is also another big-leafed mugwort, both of which are great for cooking with. And interesting, you mentioned the name there in Gaelic. On the Isle of Man, it's called Bollenbane, and actually every year at the Tynwald, which is the oldest functioning parliament in the world, set up by the Vikings over 1,000 years ago, all of the officials to this day still wear a sprig of mugwort in their lapel badge, which I think is super interesting. And of course, I wondered about the reason for this, and there could be many reasons, but certainly mugwort has a history of magic and psychic protection, which, if you're a judge, maybe sitting at the Tynwald, and you've got to make a judgment on somebody, you might just need a little bit of that protection, particularly on a very witchy, magical island like the Isle of Man. So this is an amazing plant, and also connected deeply to wormwood. But perhaps you could tell us a little bit about some of the chemical constituents of the Artemisias, bro, that could bring in another piece here.
So yeah, the chemistry is really interesting, actually. A couple of really vital points about this, I think. I mean, as you know, all Artemisias to some extent contain similar chemistry, but the proportions of different phytochemicals can be different in each one. For example, the lactone thuone, which is the component in Artemisia absinthium wormwood, that makes it slightly toxic, actually, because thuone can actually be act as a cumulative toxin in the liver, which is one of the reasons why they don't advise you to use wormwood tincture, particularly for too long in one stretch. And this is obviously, it's a big part of its chemistry, and it's part of the way that it deals with parasites, for example, in very physical terms. But the thuone in Artemisia absinthium is higher, much higher than that in mugwort, if those plants are grown in the UK. But if you grow mugwort in a warmer climate, in a Mediterranean climate, for example, the thulium content in mugwort in that location might even exceed that of Artemisia absinthium or wormwood grown in the UK. So plants sort of decide what levels of their chemicals to produce based on their geographical situation. And I think perhaps other considerations too. We're talking about somebody who spoke to their plants and said, "We make an oil out of you," and the plant duly obliged by producing more of the aromatic constituents. But the other thing was that obviously mugwort is a huge dreaming plant. That you obviously know about the mugwort pillow, where you just take dried mugwort, basically put it in a calico or muslin bag, pop it under your pillow, and it'll give you amazing dreams overnight. And everybody knows it's true. I've got students to do this time and time and over, and they're always completely amazed by it. So it works, but nobody really knows how. And there was actually an academic paper that I unearthed from somebody who actually wanted to find out, why this was happening. He really couldn't. He was really casting around in the dark for this one. The closest he came up with was that some of these compounds, particularly the lactones, work in a similar way to cannabis. In other words, they activate or they interact with the endocannabinoid system in the body. And that was the closest he could come. In other words, he was basically saying it has a sort of cannabis-like effect. It doesn't really work as a theory because, if that were true, you should be able to get the same effects by, consuming it internally, by ingesting it. And that doesn't really happen, I don't think, unless you're perhaps doing certain other magical practices at the same time. That's always possible. Okay. But that idea of, that this is where, science, and often happens with regard to magical herbs, particularly perhaps with all herbs to some extent, fails to understand the way in which plants work. And this has been going on a long time, actually. Back in the time of Galen, some 2,000 years ago, Galen was really the guy who was sort of most responsible for the system of medicine that prevailed in Europe for 15 or 16 centuries, actually called Galenic medicine. And he used to talk, he didn't understand it, he used to talk about the proprietates occulti of plants. These were the hidden properties, the unknown properties that they couldn't explain, even with their science of the day, the science of the humors and the temperaments and all of that. And he found that in many cases, and mugwort was one such, I think, that it was not possible to explain how these things worked on that level, on that molecular level. So I found that really interesting, the attempt to pick apart I see it as a magical property. Mind you, I have maybe my own definition of magic. I don't think magic is unnatural or supernatural. It's part of nature, but it does very much depend on the equipment, if you like, that you're using to observe these things. And at a certain level, the possibility of explaining plant actions simply in terms of phytochemicals breaks down. And I was really interested to see that mugwort kind of defeated that particular attempt.
Yeah, I mean, wow, so many things I'd just like to loop back to there, because I mean, I truly believe that if you want to get into the world of plant spirit communication, working at that level as you do and as I do, and probably quite a few of our listeners do, mugwort is the first plant that I met. It's also the first plant that I met then later with my teacher, Pam Montgomery, who said at the time, if you only ever get to know one plant well, make sure it's mugwort. Mm-hmm. And there are many, many reasons for this, because the gifts that particular plant within the Artemisia spectrum has is vast. There's so many other things to do with midwifing and breech births, and there's that whole side of it too. There's the dreaming side, there's also the magical side, there's the protection against the dark arts side, there's the alignment side, and it goes on. And it's like, I could probably do a whole TV series just about mugwort. And of course, she has the name Mugwort because of the fact that they used to make beer out of her. Some people think that she's not so keen on this name. I'm not too sure myself. She's never complained to me about it, but perhaps maybe it's not the most feminine of names. I don't know. That's maybe a question for another time. But I also just want to loop back to this idea that plants can be toxic for us, which on a very phytochemical 3D Western science perspective, they can be. But I have taken wormwood almost every day of my life for about the last 7 years. And as far as I can see, as far as I can see, doesn't seem to have had any detrimental effects on any part of me at all. I've also been poisoned by quite a few plants who, I had a very powerful experience once with henbane, where I thought I might have to take myself to the hospital until I started dialoguing with the spirit of henbane. I was like, am I going to die? And she was just like, why do you think that? And I was just like, well, because you're poisonous. And she said, I'm only going to be poisonous if you think I'm going to kill you. And why would I want to do that? I'm trying to show you something here. And so I then went through this process of being able to distinguish energetic poisons moving through my body. And she was able to show me how to contain them, which actually turned out to be very useful when I got attacked by something that was pretending to be a certain virus that we were told was running amok in our world. Yeah. My understanding really, and again, I think back to some of the teachings at Buddhist school about stories of lamas being able to drink poison and not affecting them. Again, there's this idea of sort of the 5D perspective on things. It only hurts you if you allow it to, right? And the plants are always saying to me, it's like, we're not going to hurt you. Why would we want to do that? What's the healing benefit to you to do that? Now, maybe some beings have to pick henbane, get poisoned by it and die from it. Maybe that's part of their soul contract. They have to learn to have death by poisoning. It's not for me to say, but it's definitely not in my track. And I've been poisoned lots of times by plants. And yet here I am today, probably in the best shape I've ever been in many ways. Certainly consciousness wise, I feel much more liberated and expanded than I've done before. So I just want to put this into the mixture that, and also in the Dr. Hilda Clark protocol, you're advised to take wormwood capsules for every day for the rest of your life. And so this flies a little bit in the face of this idea that we can get toxicity from wormwood, because actually, when you look into the levels that you would have to require, you'd have to have so much wormwood in your system to get toxic from it that actually the plant's so bitter that you probably you wouldn't want that much. So the chances of actually getting toxic or poisoned by wormwood, I personally believe, are almost minimal. However, that's just my opinion. I'm not a professional herbalist or a doctor. I'm just sharing from my own experience of working with wormwood for nearly a decade. Just to throw that into the mix too.
Yeah, I mean, I can't call you out on that, Davyd. I kind of agree. I have to take a responsible position.
I know you do, bro.
An educator, and I have to go along with the narrative to some extent. There are people who don't take responsibility for their actions in quite the same way that you and I do. It's a powerful plant. I mean, what I get from that is it is a powerful plant. Plants with potentially, I use the word, put it in inverted commas, constituents are powerful plants. Henbane is another one. Henbane is Schedule 20 in this country. We're allowed to use it. I have henbane tincture in my cupboard, but we know that there are risks to using them. And I think that in a way, the narrative that says, yeah, this plant can harm you if you don't respect it is not a bad one to put over. I do feel that, used properly, used intelligently and with good guidance, then I don't think anybody will come to harm from using wormwood. I also use wormwood daily. Actually, it's in a mix that I use which I call digestive bitters, to enhance digestive processes. And it's one of the key herbs in that mix. There are about 5 or 6 others that we use as well, but it is fantastic actually as a bitter flavor. Of course, is very, very important in herbal medicine. It does a lot of cool things for us, including keeping our hearts healthy.
Right. I mean, I'm going to do a lot more around wormwood in the future. And it's going to be one of the plants I'm talking about in the upcoming session. I'm going to be recording with the Ascended Master Zachariah, which will be going out in a couple of weeks, about quantum plant medicine. And then the Artemisias will very much be a part of that. But I can share something that he talked to me personally about with wormwood before, which he believed was going to be important in the time to come, was that wormwood can actually alleviate depression. Now, that's one to sit with a little bit, because it's not something that I had originally had linked with wormwood. But when we have our bodies heavily under the influence of parasitic energies, of which we have a lot in the world right now, an increased amount over the last 2 years, wormwood at the physical level is very good for getting rid of parasites, as are all of the Artemisias. And I think that's a huge piece of research still yet to be understood about. I mean, there's over 400 species of Artemisia in the world. Every continent has its own Artemisias. North America has so many different ones. And of course, they are very widely used by the native First Nations people. But I think it's interesting that Wormwood, when I'm doing clearings, and of course any of my clients who are listening to this podcast will know, because I've been recommending the Dr. Hilda Clark parasite cleanse for a while. It works very much on the physical aspect of parasites, which, you know, we do need to cleanse out every once in a while, but she's really, really good at working with etheric parasites, particularly off-planet parasitic energies. And I think it's no coincidence that Wormwood is actually named in the Book of Revelations. Maybe some of the listeners have heard this one before, but it goes something like, when the third angel blew their trumpet, a star appeared, and the star's name was Wormwood. And Wormwood gets into the water and makes the water bitter, and many men will die. That's in the Bible, named. So I think that's also interesting, something to sit with. And this is the work sometimes with plant spirits, dealing with plant intelligence. We have all of these different inputs that come from a variety of sources that help to build up this gestalt, I think, of the intelligence of the plant. And we can understand many, many things about this. You know, I kind of wondered about that phrase. It sounds kind of strong, and that's perhaps one to sit with, but just wanted to throw that in there too, bro.
Yeah, and that's astonishing, isn't it? The Revelations citation of Wormwood. I haven't got my head around that. I have to say, I looked at that and thought, "Whoa, what does that mean?" But I fully agree. I mean, it's just an amazing plant, and I think its time is definitely coming. And certainly, you know, I've been on the front line treating people who have had, you know, the big bad virus and the big bad medication that was offered for the virus. In many cases, I had somebody today actually who got COVID from the jab and then got long COVID from the jab, i.e., you know, the whole thing was just a complete nightmare for her. And so we're using some Wormwood there actually as well. And I found it an amazing herb actually in those situations. It's part of a detox formulation that I made originally actually for detoxing from something that we saw in the early stages of the injectables being rolled out, that people close to people who've been injected were getting sick. And I actually developed this detox tea to help them. It was very effective. But then, of course, it was taken as it was sort of dubbed the post-jab tea, and so everybody was using it for all sorts of purposes. But Wormwood, major component of that, and Wormwood not particularly pleasant in a tea, it has to be said, but worth persevering with because the effects were quite stunning. I found it very, very useful for treating. I mean, you know, we use it for Lyme disease, we use it for Epstein-Barr virus, you know, any of those situations. I'm not saying that we're killing viruses, or, you know, we had a talk about Epstein-Barr and the entity that is Epstein-Barr before, but what we're talking about, I suppose, it really is the way in which these herbs, these plants, can manipulate or cleanse the terrain of our bodies so that those viruses are not activated and don't harm us.
Yes, I feel that Wormwood is a plant that's going to crop up a lot more in future conversations. It's certainly been a big part of my dialogue over the last couple of years, mainly because she wanted it to be, and I work very, very strongly and closely with Wormwood pretty much every day. And Mugwort too. I love the Artemisias for lots of reasons. They're very magical, but they're also incredibly powerful. I've worked with many, many powerful plants in my life. I love all of them. But I think in the most recent sort of period, the last couple of years, more than any plant, I've been astonished by the star-being qualities that Wormwood brings into the mix, because this plant has so much potential, and I think we're still discovering that. The extent of that. We only have a few more minutes to go. I just want to quickly bring another plant, which we are definitely going to expand into, but I just want to drop it into the mix just as a sort of a seed bomb, and that is aloe, which I know you know a little bit about. So just give us a couple of top notes on this, which we can set up for a future call, bro.
Top notes on aloe. Yeah, a plant with a kind of an interesting dual character in terms of the way we use it herbally, because of course on the one hand the aloe leaf gel is incredibly cooling and soothing. You put it on burns and scalds and sunburn and anywhere where the tissues are irritated and hot and red and painful, and it will help to cool it down. It'll help to moisturize it. It will help to protect it in many ways, and you can use it on the internal surfaces as well, the internal surfaces of the gut, for example. It's very good for irritable bowel and food sensitivities and leaky gut syndrome and all of those things. But at the same time, if you use, that's the gel, if you use the inner rind, it has a high content of anthraquinone glycosides, talking about chemistry again here. And anthraquinone glycosides are major league laxatives. So it is actually the most powerful. And there, again, there are many, many species of aloe, particularly actually around where you're living. There's loads of it, I know. But the one we know here, of course, is aloe vera. And aloe vera can be used in the same way. It's not as powerful. It hasn't got as much of the laxative quality as the others, but it does work. And when you harvest and dry aloe gel, not the gel that we use the internal bit, but that part of the rind, which is just between the leaf, if you like, and the interior gel, it dries into this sort of almost black hard substance. We used to call it bitter aloes. And parents used to actually put it on, plaster it on their children's fingers and thumbs to stop them sucking their thumbs. My mum did this to me. She put bitter aloe on my thumb to stop me sucking my thumb. I loved it. I sucked my thumb and then I asked for more, and I had very, very good bowel motions. But if you use too much of it, a little bit later on, when I actually started studying herbal medicine, my first teacher sent me home with a bag of this stuff and said, just chip a bit off and mix it in some warm water in the morning and, you know, drink that and see what it does. And basically, I didn't know how much to do. She didn't really tell me how much. I think it was sort of, you know, educate by trial and error. Error being a big part of it. Anyway, I just thought a massive lump of it, dissolved it, which it did quite nicely, into this cup of water. And it was really like discovering the laws of jet propulsion. Really, I didn't get off the toilet for most of the day. Wow. It was very, very powerful indeed. So I learned not to use quite so much of it. But we do put it into our some of our sort of, you know, bowel motility aids, should we say. So again, that very sort of kind of that swinging between that sort of very soft, soothing, cooling, comforting side of it, and actually get the hell out of here. So again, actually using it in the context of parasites as well, because once you isolate a parasite, you then have to get it out of the system. So very important to move the bowels.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that in because of its purgative qualities, and again, similar plant in that regard that I've worked with a lot is tobacco. And anyone who's ever drunk tobacco will know how purging that can be. But I guess the point here is the purging, right, of unhelpful energies or toxicities that may be residing somewhere in our physical body that perhaps are preventing us from receiving new types of energy. And I just want to share this as a final piece that, with the matrix down, from what I can see, the global net has gone. Many things to talk about this perhaps on a future show, but also the passing through the photon belts and all of the solar flares has really propelled and projected a lot of light onto the planet, which is really helping things to shift. As a sort of moment of hope and clarity, what I'm seeing personally is that the light is very much here, New Earth is very much here. It really depends where we put our focus and our attention. Again, this loops back to some of the things we were saying earlier in the show. But as I've been saying to many clients and also colleagues, we need to purge out, we need to cleanse, we need to detox out, because we need to make space for that light in our energy field, but also in our physical body. If our body is being weighed down by toxic energies or toxic materials in the body, it's difficult to find space to receive the higher frequency. So I do really invite all of our listeners to think seriously about parasite cleanse and heavy metal cleanses. I've advised all of my clients over the last 2 years to do that, and all of them that have probably in the best shape of the people that I know right now, because of the cleansing process. So yes, it's not nice to purge. It's not nice to be jet propelled backwards and forwards across your bathroom if you've had too much of some of these medicines. And also just to say again, some of the best ways to learn about plants is to put them through their body. I'm not in any way suggesting anyone takes that as a mantra, but I know from my personal experience that some of the most interesting and informative experiences I've had have been from perhaps being in error with the dosage of plants. But I'm still here. I'm still happy. I'm still breathing, so somehow it's all okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I could tell some stories about error and plants as well, but that's perhaps for another time. Yeah.
Anyway, bro, look, we've rattled around the web of weird once again this week. We've covered a whole bunch of stuff. I hope that we've thrown some interesting seeds out there for our listeners to chew on until the next edition. And again, just really, really urging everyone to take that much more elevated scorpionic position of the eagle's perch and survey our emotions, survey how we get triggered in our emotions by things being presented to us, and then come to a place of perhaps alignment within ourselves where we can discern truth for ourselves a little bit more easily.
Yeah, nicely put. And yeah, from my angle, there was a part of today's discussion that ventured into some sensitive territory, and just to remember that we're just trying to figure it out, guys, just like you. Yeah. So bear with.
Yes, thank you for that, bro. And as always, thank you all the feedback that we get from all of you out there. We do appreciate it. And please also suggest areas or plants you'd like to hear more about. Web of Weird is about the collective interconnectedness of all of us with everything here on the planet that's part of nature. And we're in many ways trying to remember how that more natural Web of Weird looks now without the overlays that have been there for so long. And a lot of that is freeing up our minds to be able to look at things in a different way without being attached to necessarily any one particular view or another. And I again urge all of our audience to keep breaking things down, keep meditating, find a nice tree, take some nice plants, and see where it leads you. It's life is an investigation, I think, and it's one that's meant to be done with love and with fun. And if we do it like that, then it can be super interesting and perhaps elevate us to new places of consciousness. So on that note, thank you again, bro, for all of your wisdom and your knowledge of plants. It's always super interesting. And we'll see all of you in 2 weeks' time. And watch out on upcoming channels for further information on other videos that are going to be released soon to do with plants. And I hope that we get to do a few more dedicated shows, Pete, around certain plants, because I think there's a lot that we could put our heads to and share with our audience out there. You have a final word for today, bro?
Yeah, keep laughing, really, I guess. Humor is the thing that occurs to me. We have to keep it light.
We do.
And enjoy, stay in the heart, keep laughing.
Nice. Peace out, everybody, and see you next time. Ciao for now.